Welcome. This is Happy Healthy Cows, the show where we chat with experts about all things that keep dairy cows comfortable and happy. We'll talk freestyle bedding, manure management, barn design, ventilation, and all the details that make a big difference. After all, comfortable cows are the foundation of a healthy herd and successful dairy production. When cows are happy, dairy farms run better. Welcome. My name is Renee Schrift, and welcome to our podcast. And today with me is Mr. David Swartz. Dave is our regional sales manager at this point in time with McClanahan, and mainly focusing on agriculture, which he has focused on agriculture since your start. How many years ago, Dave?
21 years. I started in January of 2005.
So let's talk a little bit about your expertise and what you bring to the table. Let's just focus a little bit on what you've done over these past 20 years, and just summarize that for us.
Well, over the 20 years, I've done quite a few things, like you mentioned earlier. Not only the sales side of things, but startups, talking with the other salespeople, the engineers, just sharing my knowledge of things that I've seen, worked on in the agricultural side of the McClanahan. Traveled quite a bit across the world, startup systems, in Russia, China, Japan, Chile, everywhere, every corner of the world. It's been a blessing for me to be a part of this, and some of the things that I've seen, heard, talked about have been phenomenal. This industry is just amazing to be a part of.
So let's talk a little bit about the various climates. You mentioned a lot of different countries there that we've worked in, that you've had a chance to do startup in. What is the big picture there in your mind? Like when you think about all those territories, maybe some of them have to be housed, some of them not. I think most of the ones that we do work with are really not in buildings per se. They're more outside type of environments, or like a more mild climate. Just kind of touch base on that as it compares to some of the startup experience that you've had here in North America.
I would say the biggest thing would be the temperature and the humidity. We've done some work in Florida, Georgia, the Middle East, places that are really humid. Those systems are basically outdoor, and we've learned a lot over these 20-some years, or 30 years as the division has grown. Just having a system outside is just not, the best thing to do. Sometimes you need to cover it. The sunlight affects, a certain piece of the equipment, the poly, the plastics, anything that has to do with, fading, things like that. To have things covered has been, one of the things that we've learned over the years. The humidity side of things, I think, has really affected the cow comfort. And then the products, or the manure that we see coming to our system, changes throughout the year, mostly during the summertime when there's additional water from cooling or misting of the cows. That has really affected and has us, looking at different options for feeding our system, conveying materials, things like that. So the climate across the globe is different everywhere we go. We don't do a whole lot out in California where because it's arid, so sand can dry a little bit quicker. Some of the things that we've invested in, time, money, has been the dryer system for sand. So that can negate some of those issues of wet sand going back into the cows, under the cows. So we've done a really good job over the years of managing these systems, identifying issues, looking at the barns, cross vents that have low airflow to dry out sand as it's going into the stalls, or one side is drier than the other side. So, as a group, and I'm going to say it, Renee, you've taken the lead on a lot of this of, barn management, looking at the moisture in the sand, things like that. So it's come a long way, and we've got more stuff coming down the pike. It's really exciting, and systems designs based off of more water in the system. So we're moving forward, and that's a great thing. That keeps me excited every day. I talk to our group, and it's things that we're moving forward with are just so exciting, and keeps all of us on our toes and moving forward.
Yeah, constant innovation or continuous improvement is definitely key. I think the interesting thing is, as we've worked internationally, the manure conveyance, like from the barn to the system, there's only so many ways to get it there. So it's not like internationally there's like this, different way. It's, flushing, it's fluming, it's vac trucking. We've experienced it all. And surprisingly, in some areas, we've seen the vac trucks in areas where we didn't think that there was that technical support level, even us going into those dairies. And it's kind of a little bit, concerning, because in some of these countries where some of these large strategic dairies are placed, because they're making powder, and really understanding their model and their growth and why they have a dairy there. We're very fortunate to be working with some of those strategic placed dairies, and they're really well operated. But there's nothing novel when it comes to conveying manure to a system. So even in those international areas, like let's say South America, we're still working through like vac trucked manure. But then on top of it, what I think that the one thing that was surprising to me over the years, kind of didn't realize the rainfall, and like you alluded to, the humidity was really going to impact certain things. So moving forward, we've learned that, if these reception pits that are receiving manure from, 12,000 cows, and you have strategically sized pits, and you bring that manure in, and then you have the rainfall on top of it, or a rainy part of the season, it's a lot of water. It's a lot of water in a pit like that. There's a lot of concrete still, because they still have to stack the sand. They got to contain the leaching off those sand piles, the manure traffic, the rain. Rainwater is going to go somewhere. So we still contend with some of those challenges, as we do even here in the States. It might not be because the water's coming in from rain, but it could be coming into the system via a cooling system. And, we see that all the time, where we struggle with that dilution on vac truck, undiluted manure delivery. And then we also see a lot of flushing. So it's interesting, even internationally, the flushing systems, they become pretty simple as far as really relying heavily on our pumps and our cyclones to separate, and do a good job there. And I think the footprint makes sense. I think the budget makes sense. And, the technology makes sense when we're looking at some of those areas. But still, the conveyance challenge, and whether it's undiluted or diluted or high rainfall, low rainfall, we still have all of those same challenges. It's just that a lot of the systems that we have, especially in the warmer climates, they're outside. So like you said, you contend with you have to prepare for the elements, changing out rubber components, because they're going to be a little bit higher consumable with not only the UV, but just also the wear and tear on the sand and the size of the dairy.
Yep. And just to back up on a point you talked about, things internationally, what's nice with our industry, there's a lot of consultants now that travel the world from the U.S. that have a good grasp on design, conveyance, and things like that. And it's great for us to be able to follow along and go to these dairies that these consultants have gone to, and prepared the owner for what's down the road. And it's been a great blessing for us, is just following these guys around. Some of them are really, really great with like doing sand separation, sand barns, and to be honest with you, we could go down the sand route, as these consultants are telling the story of sand, and it's great to follow that. They've set the table for a lot of things that we've done, and we know that sand's the gold standard for bedding, and it's just nice to be able to go into these places and just help them out with the separation part of things on our side.
Yeah, they definitely want to focus on cow comfort, building the best facility to get the best results for those cows. And I think a lot of the consultants, you're right, that we work with today, they're really concerned about the the barn, the layouts, and constantly improving, giving these territories in other countries just the tools and some of the experience and the data behind building freestyle facilities the way we do today, and adding that extra comfort. And whether it's a sand, a deep bedded sand freestall, or maybe it's even working with some of these consultants on manure bedding too, which we do, and that's all been really beneficial. And like you said, if we can be part of that planning from the get go, it definitely can take more of the stress and the concern of those manure systems a little bit more off the table for some of these sites. But there again, I mean, they can tour and they can go see different technologies. The dairymen are going to kind of have an idea. The managers are going to have an idea of what they want to do. Also getting comfortable with bedding on recycled sand.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And the more we go on with sand separation year after year, the more systems we have out there that these folks can go see. All types. We mentioned conveyance of flushing, flush flumes, vac trucks, scraping. We have systems at all these multiple systems that are available to go see and look at and experience, and that just puts a comfort level in our prospects that there's something out there very similar to what they have, and that not just nationally, globally. So it's been really good.
So when you think about different climates across the North America, everywhere we work, and we have equipment, cold climates, warm climates, and then international, what are some of the key things that you think about, or like during the time of development of these projects that are key for you to be thinking about or to share with the dairymen themselves or the people that are planning those dairies?
I would say one of the biggest things, and we're going through with a couple dairies now, is a backup plan. If the manure is way too cold or frozen, what are you going to do with it? Or just say something catastrophic happens with the sand system, power outage or something like that. What is the backup plan? Can you take it somewhere? Can you stack it? Can you store it? Those didn't used to be the things that people would think about. When you buy a system to do specifically, sand separation, solid separation, whatever, you think of that as your one and only way of doing something, but you got to have a backup plan. And temperature, developing something in upper Canada compared to something in Florida is a whole different mindset with the heating aspect, tank depth, just getting the manure to the separation system. You got to think about all those things because of the temperature. And in the summertime, things are, you have cooling and rain and things like that. We got to look at the whole layout as a whole system that we need to approach and develop, and get with the prospect to make sure they're comfortable. If there's an engineer involved from another consulting group or something, that we need to look at everything that is involved with designing the system, the dairy, the barns, the travel lane. Everything just needs to mesh together to make a successful system.
Now, so let's just break it down a little bit more. When you think about the colder climates, which you get to do a lot of startups in Ohio and Michigan, and like you said, even in up northern Canada, when you're thinking about those kind of climates, just like talk a little bit about those buildings and how we're kind of setting those up these days.
Yep. When you start getting into those, upper Ohio, Michigan, North Dakota, South Dakota areas where it's really cold, you got to look at the building as a protectant for the sand separation system. Now, when you start talking about closing up doors and sealing things up, now you talk about ventilation. Now that becomes huge. in the design for that building. You got to have fans, exhaust, um, gas monitoring, things like that, just so to keep everybody safe and secure in those buildings. Now you talk about lighting, um, like I said, ventilation, gas monitoring, but it's all got to go together, and unfortunately that adds quite an expense to systems in the north compared to say Tennessee or Georgia, where you can basically build a building without walls and and have a system there. So
Yeah.
yeah.
And then the heating element too, and then
Mm-hmm.
a lot of these buildings, are insulated to a degree, with heavy overhead doors. So you have the expense of the building piece of it, and like you said, just all the things that go inside that building, to help, I guess, improve the environment when you do have to close them up versus you can in the summertime keep them open. So in the summertime, we want the buildings as open as possible, especially on warm, breezy days. Keep the air moving, keep the air exchange through these buildings. But in the wintertime, it is a challenge because you're dealing with possibly some humidity, moisture, the odor, the gases that can build up, and then but you're also trying to keep these buildings at least, if it's cold for an extended period of time, which we have seen, especially this last couple winters. You have these long stints of time where it's below freezing. You're going to want to have some heat in those buildings just to keep them to keep all the manure moving. If you can get the manure to those buildings and it's somewhat, not frozen, still movable, still pumpable, then let's process it. But at the same time, that building needs to provide some level of like warmth in there to keep the equipment from freezing. So you have that you need to be concerned about. And then also in the wintertime, instead of taking the sand outside, potentially building enough room to have a couple weeks worth of sand storage, possibly. I mean, some dairies are content with maybe a couple days, and that's where the budget is. But then there's other dairies they'll grow that area and expand that real estate where you're stacking sand off a system to allow it to drain, and it's really used more intensely probably as you get more into the colder months of the year.
Right, and that could lead into some other things. You had mentioned about short-term storage. Maybe they bed more often during the week. To put lighter loads of sand into the stalls so it can dry quicker, and then that leads into grooming as well. If you groom your stalls, you're turning over the sand. Trying to aerate it a little bit. Also, we look at a couple dairies that have sand dryers. They don't need any stacking area. Once it comes off that dryer, it's ready to go back in the stall. So, we have different options for all that stuff, and we can talk about, what management plan, would be best for your facility, based off of how you want to operate. Going back to the weather, the cold weather, one of the nicest things I saw was out in, I think it was Iowa or South Dakota, where the manure system is basically in the barn with the dairy, so the vac truck or the conveyance never has to go outside. Open doors, close doors, release the heat, introduce cold. I thought that was a great idea when I saw that. So if these dairy designers could think about that a little bit more, and I know sometimes it's just not possible, especially if you're going to retrofit a building into an existing dairy, but a greenfield site, my goodness, if you could integrate that manure system right into that building next to the barn where that vac truck does not have to leave, I mean that just insulates that facility a whole lot more. You got the heat from the barn migrating into that sand barn, and it just, I don't think you need any extra heating.
No, I think you're right. Some of these facilities, the larger you get, the more cows you have under more of a larger complex or building, that's well ventilated. But, if you really, the vac truck the driver doesn't even have time sometimes to make that longer commute with that vac truck and that manure to a system well outside of the freestall facility. I mean, there's just literally not enough time in the schedule. So when you look at some of these how these things have been strategically laid out with the larger parlors, the more cows, and then where the proximity is of that sand building, which we do talk about that all the time when we do meetings with dairy producers, like where are you going to load your sands, your stall filler? How are you getting the sand back in the barn? Are you going to stage it somewhere? How far can the vac trucks go? Where is the centralized location? And in some of these facilities, vac trucking is really, with the larger pens and the size of the pens, is the only way to go. And it could be two. And then they don't have time to go outside of the barn and go another quarter of a mile and then turn around and come back before those cows are coming back into those pens. So I think a lot of it is logistics and timing, but you're right, those facilities are more and more impressive all the time, and it's challenging us to be more creative on these layouts and to really work with the operators and the manure flow of those facilities. Now let's talk. I always get a smile whenever I see a case study that I know Dave was very influential on with an outside North Carolina, South Carolina. I always look at those and say, man, I wish they were all that easy. So there's some of those types of systems that you've had a lot of experience with, and some of those are also internationally as well. But describe some of those types of systems and how they just have become, I guess, very simple.
Yeah, we've taken, a dairy that's, asking for, a simple design, and it may not be a lot of cows. We're working numbers up on some of these systems, but like you mentioned, the one in North Carolina, it's 100, 120 cows. It's more or less a show dairy for education, and they're making ice cream at their own ice cream. So it's a really cool site to go see. But we've taken that system, or the idea of that system, and made it so simple that the operator, it only runs like an hour a day. So it's very low horsepower, very low mechanically input and repair parts and things like that, which I credit, our whole team of just talking about things and talking through and moving forward with, ideas that someone may have, that simple system that we're talking about in North Carolina has now expanded into a large 8,000 cow system in Michigan. So, keeping it simple for our operators to understand. And, we've talked about some of these large dairies have mechanics on staff that are just specifically, working on just the manure system, where these smaller dairies, that guy has no time to be just there all day long. So
right, he's busy also running the
busy.
dairy.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yep.
They get stretched very thin, very quick.
Very quickly, and the last thing they want to do is add another person, because that's not in their budget. So we've refined some of these, and what's nice working for McClanahan, the company has so many possible products that we haven't even touched yet, that we could reach out to with all these experienced folks in our company to talk about what could we use on our side that you're using on your side to make things better for us. And so far, it's been wonderful. The dewatering screens, the hydrocyclones, some of the things coming down the road. It's just nice to tap into that experience of our company and the product lines that we have accessible to us, and that's made a big difference in low cost input, just better recovery and drier sand. So, it's just wonderful to be able to work with our group to make things happen.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, McClanahan has a huge, vast product line, and we're always looking for other opportunities to expand that. And then with the wet processing and the aggregate side, we do bring a lot of that technology and integrate it into the dairy side, and separating sand specifically. So it does give us an advantage there, because we do have the equipment that is built for the sand and the abrasion. The only difference is we're always dealing with the manure fiber part of it, which is always the challenge, right? But we do make it work, and our engineering team has the expertise to, change or modify or work around some of those obstacles in order to still get the same results.
Yeah, and you hit the nail right on the head with our experience. You look at, you're over 25 years in the company, 21 for me. There's at least 2 or 3 other folks in that 20-year range, just in our group alone, that we've held our group together, and they've stayed, and we can experience things together as a group, and we mesh together very well, and so that's kind of helped as well.
It has. So Dave, I just want to thank you for all of your knowledge today, and some of your experience, and just some of the tips that you've shared on, these systems internationally, McClanahan's take on it, what we try to prepare for, what we're looking to do in the future. And I think all of that just, adds to everything that we are improving manure systems, high sand recovery, making sure that bedding is the best quality it can be to go back under those cows, whether it's sand or solids. We're always looking to make sure that we're, a standout, and have those dairies stand out among the average, because they're working with equipment that can get it done. So thank you for joining today. I really appreciate it.
You're very welcome. Thank you again for inviting me. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks for listening to Happy Healthy Cows. Be sure to subscribe on your favorite listening app, and follow Happy Healthy Cows on Instagram and TikTok for more educational cow content. Here's to healthier herds.